We wanted to make a couple proposals to the audience just to check in on where things are. We realized today is about solutions, and we thought one option was we can just kind of end the panel early and discuss the solutions out in the courtyard, just start happy hour early. That proposal is overruled by my panelists here. Second, Commissioner Torres is a theater expert and said he could do some live performances in the middle of our session here just to keep things lively. That was overruled as well. We have three great panelists here. As I alluded to, we have Commissioner Antonio Torres Miranda from the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau. He'll be talking to us about some of their island experiences in Puerto Rico with their energy transition, as well as the development of their grid services program. We have Walker Wright, the Vice President of Public Policy for Sunrun, and Brian Gold, President and CEO of SolarRay. And we're gonna get right into the discussion. I have a little bit of setup on the topic. And just first off, this is grid services, virtual power plants is about as wonky, jargony topic area as you can get into in an extremely wonky topic. So the way I try to explain this to my daughter, family and friends we have energy devices in our homes, we have appliances, they have a day job. If you have a solar array, it's producing energy. If you have an electric vehicle charger, you're using that primarily. If you have water heater, air conditioner, you want it to perform what you need when you need it. But there's also times that there's flexibility in when it can be used. And particularly in an individual site, there may be maybe not a ton of value to a broader electric grid. But if we can aggregate all of these individual systems in a coordinated way and rely on that, tap them when the grid needs them, then there's potential value. And that is historically what demand response programs were set up to do. And the new rounds of programs are doing this broadly with a much wider array of uses. And I just want to get into a little bit of the national context here and then what we're seeing in the islands. In the past 4 years, the Department of Energy Loan Program Office put out 2 excellent reports as part of their overall liftoff series. If you look at the virtual power plant liftoff reports, there was a first one done doing a survey of the potential throughout the United States and some really remarkable results there. It showed that there's up to 10 to 20% cost-effective peak demand. It could be provided by different types of grid resources throughout the United States, and that this would be actually essential to meeting the load growth that you're seeing throughout most of the rest of the United States that has really put a pinch on the state commissions and utilities there. So that dynamic has really driven this as a national discussion. If we look more locally at islands, Puerto Rico as well as Hawaii, particularly Maui, are going through very similar situations that we talked about this morning. We're transitioning through these older aging power plants, bringing new renewable projects online, and these the capacity from these grid resources can help throughout that transition. And if you look at the DOE's report as well, there's an interesting graph in there showing that these grid services can be the lowest net cost source of peak capacity. A Brattle Group did an analysis comparing those services with peaker plants as well as standalone battery storage. So that's kind of an overall context, and now I would like to turn it over to Commissioner Torres to talk about the situation in Puerto Rico.
Okay, I did ask for them to bring me from above to wake everyone up, but they just gave me a new microphone instead. So I'm Commissioner Torres, I'm from Puerto Rico. I'm supposed to talk about our VPP program in Puerto Rico. I was going to talk about explaining the concept of our energy system in Puerto Rico so you could have a concept of why our VPP program has been so successful. But I did notice that Hawaii and Puerto Rico are very similar, extremely similar. I was telling Jay, if you just change the name, it would be the same conversations and the same problems that you have here. We're an island. It's expensive to live there. The electricity is expensive because, as they said, we're not connected to any other transmission line to share generation. And there was a panelist that did say that her daughter was here, who was 10 years old, and her main concern was that her daughter would have to leave the island. So we have those same concerns in Puerto Rico. So that's what we're trying to work out. Our program is called CBEST program, and it's a Customer Battery Energy Sharing Program. And it was very initial. All we wanted to find out is if the customers were willing to share their battery with Luma, the utility. So instead, what we did was we put in aggregators to deal with these directly with customers. Hold on. So what happened there was we started it started November 2023, and for the first 3 or 4 months, we only had 50, not even 100 people were in the program. And we wanted only to improve our grid stability, and that was it, and to see how people would react by sharing their battery. A year and a half later, we have 9,500 customers in the program, and we have 21 megawatts being dispatched in the program. And we are now the second largest VPP program in the United States. And I'm very proud of the program because we worked it in the Energy Bureau, and I believe it's a way to make people participants of the solution of the lack of generation in Puerto Rico. And also, it's the only program that I have heard in the street talking about it in a favorable manner. And it was only 2 people who spoke about it, but compared to that, I've never heard anyone else talk about anything good about the electric system in Puerto Rico. I was very proud that I did hear 2 people in 2 years talk about the program and be happy about it. So we're actually increasing the program. That's what we call the CBEST, and that was a transition program, an initial test. But it was so successful that now we're doing the CBEST permanent program. And with that program, we expect to have 19,500 customers and bring it up to at least 40 megawatts. But Luma did a resource adequacy study for the summer of 2025, and Puerto Rico is going to be lacking this summer 800 megawatts. So we're behind 800 megawatts for this summer because we're just like Hawaii. Our plants are old, they're not working, they have to be shut down. We want to retire a coal plant, and we don't have the generation to replace it. We're trying to bring renewables, and we just don't have enough capacity. So we know that the CBS program is not going to replace the 800 that we're trying to get. We're doing a proposal for those 800, and hopefully in 2 weeks we'll know the proponents who are going to bring temporary generation for this summer. But now we're trying to do the CBS Plus. I don't know if you want to stop me now, if you want me to jump to...
Keep going. You just finish off that part, yeah, where things are headed.
Okay, so I think we're going to jump from the CBEST permanent program. I think we're going to go straight to the CBEST Plus program. Monday, the commissioners, we signed a resolution in order, partially conditioning the approval of the CBEST Plus program. And that CBEST Plus program, we hope to bring in 60 megawatts and hopefully 48,000 customers into the program. And the way we're going to do it now is it's going to be an auto enrollment. The aggregators have agreements with their clients, and they could actually auto enroll the clients, and the client could actually opt out at the same day or at the same moment. And that auto enrollment is going to at least take a maximum of 20% of their battery if they don't opt out. And so we believe we could actually get 60 megawatts, which is pretty good. And if this keeps on working, we have the capacity to go up from 120 to 160 megawatts for the system. The original CBEST program, and I believe that's why it has worked, is that the clients have total control of the program. They can opt out in any event being called. Usually the events are called the day before, and the aggregator contacts the client, and he could opt out for that event, or he could actually increase his reserve So let's say that he would allow Luma to take 60% of his battery, he could bring it down to only 20% that we're allowed to take, so they could do that in every single event. The called events do not include weekends, and they do not include weather activities. They only include during the weekdays. Well, for the CBEST Plus program, we want to include the weekends as well, but we're not going to do event calls for weather conditions. That's it.
Thanks, Tony. I think we're going to turn to Brian next for local Hawaii perspective.
Sure, thank you. So Solar8 Corporation does business in Hawaii as Inter-Island Solar Supply, and we've done business here since 1975. We operate 5 brick and mortar locations, and our role in the market is as a wholesale distributor to the local contractors and EPCs. And so, Jay said we're going to get wonky here, right? These are the wonks, and I'm definitely not a wonk, so I'm going to try and punch above my weight here. But because we have done business in Hawaii since 1975, we've dealt with definitely every active contractor in the market and a lot of contractors that have exited the space. And so through that lens, what we provide is interestingly unique by location. And what drives that is obviously consumer demand. And one of the things that I believe is really unique about Hawaii is the staying power and unique hold that energy has in the Hawaii consumer's life. And so as we're evaluating ultimately like solutions for virtual power plants and compensation structures, I think the ultimate measurement, is consumer adoption, How many folks made the choice to enroll? So I'll come back to that. But the suite of materials that go out by island can be unique and driven by the individual consumer's connection to their energy costs as a percentage of income. And Hawaii consumers are uniquely in touch with that because of our high costs of electricity. And so they have a unique valuation and perhaps a more educated valuation of what it means to them and therefore what they deserve if they are to share their private investment. So we'll fast forward to, say, the battery bonus program, which, again, measuring by consumer adoption, my opinion would be, was a resounding success, When called upon during a set of unprecedented circumstances, the DG industry was able to stand up and enroll a tremendous resource across the state. And this is Oahu and Maui. So how were they able to do that? Well, initially, it was difficult out of the gates. And then we realized as an industry and a commission, ultimately, that we had this tremendous asset base that was, at the time, untapped, And that is the legacy deployed net energy metering consumer base, And that's a consumer set that made a dedicated choice, to make a private investment in a renewable energy system. And I think it's important to remember that those individuals made that private investment primarily to offset their energy costs, And so I liked your story about explaining what we're doing, explaining to the kids. I was doing the same thing to my daughters last night. I said, honey, I want to borrow your car. I don't just want to borrow it today. I want to borrow it every night from 6 to 8 p.m. What would you charge me? She thought about it. She goes, gas. I said, okay, yeah, gas, but what else do you pay when you own a car? Insurance. Yeah, I should probably pay some of that too, And it goes on and on from there. And therein lies, the complication of getting compensation for consumers. But that's the practical feedback that we get from our customers. And the other thing I'll stress from our customers' perspective is simplicity, I think something that is sometimes missed is what I'd refer to as the implementation gap. So from, say, a program creation to actual installation of distributed energy resources on a rooftop. We have paperwork that has to be created, explanations to the market, absorption and understanding by the market. And when I say market, I mean my market. I'm being selfish here, like the contractor network. And then they have to turn around and explain that in a sufficient manner to a consumer to get them to spend tens of thousands of dollars, right, and feel confident in that, in this newly created thing. And so I think that implementation gap can be underestimated, particularly in Hawaii, when we have some additional barriers to getting onto those rooftops. And in the context of virtual power plants, require us to think further ahead, right, and consider some of the things that maybe are not directly related to the process, but are directly related to the actual deployment of the systems, right? Permitting challenges, tax credit challenges. I'm not going to get into that. It's too depressing at the moment. But those kinds of accessory things that obviously are barriers, right? And at a time when we are being asked to go faster, right, to meet the RPS, those have to be weighed and considered in the context of what makes a successful future VPP program.
Thanks, Brian. We've had one question come in so far. We're going to ask those in a little bit. I'm going to give everyone a chance to say some opening remarks, but please keep your questions coming in. Now we're going to turn to Walker for national perspective.
Hey everyone, Walker Wright with Sunrun. I lead their public policy in the West. I joined Sunrun initially back in 2011, so I've been in the DG world for a while, really focusing on rate design, permitting, interconnection. But from the perspective of Sunrun now, today we have about 1.2 million homes across the US. Back in 2011, when I first joined the company, there were 5,000 homes, and we had this giant party, and it was like, oh my God, this is just amazing. You know, rooftop solar is on the way. And in that time period, what we think led to a lot of the growth was cracking the nut on the affordability challenge, right? So initially, as we all recall, going back in time, to go solar, it did require that upfront investment, right? And then you hear this term, what is the payback? And so Sunrun's initial concept was, how can you go to a customer and allow them to get rooftop solar without any upfront cost? And so we would look at the utility bill of the customer and say, you know, this customer is paying $300 or $400 a month. And then Sunrun would make the investment to put the system on their roof, and that customer would then have two bills, their utility bill and their Sunrun bill, and the combination of those two bills should be lower than what they were paying before. And you know, we found that initially, like, you wanted to be able to start at between 10 and 30% savings from what they were paying their utility to begin with. And one thing that we learned over the years, in those early years, was, and this has already been referenced to, every state was different in terms of the consumer understanding of energy. So I remember probably it was around 2010, Adam Browning from Vote Solar, he began calling Hawaii the postcard from the future. And we, as we were studying different customers in different states, quickly realized what Brian just said, was that the customers here were just far more aware of their energy usage. And also, not just the usage, just terms like, you know, we study across the country the difference between a kilowatt and a kilowatt hour, fixed charges, TOU, rate design. Most of the general population outside of the energy nerds in this room, they don't know those terms. Hawaii is always, you know, up here on the spectrum, just because there's that understanding, like you guys say, there's just, people are aware of electricity and how much it means, and also figuring out what the technologies are. And I learned that pretty early on where I would be here, and I'm talking to my taxi driver or Uber driver, and like, they're aware of all the different solar companies and who's doing what in the state in a way that simply would not happen in the rest of the country. So anyway, sort of fast forward from those early days of where the PPA allowed a lot of initial growth at a time back then, we remember, when solar still required a combination of high electricity costs, federal tax credits, some sort of state program, net metering. It was all those different aspects, right, that would add up to the value proposition that would lead to high penetration solar states, what we would call them, like Hawaii, California, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Arizona, or other states where the penetration wasn't that high, if it was missing a few of those programs. Where we are today is a much different place, right? And where we are today from a perspective at Sunrun is, look, let's get batteries on as many systems as possible. Knowing, and it's already been referenced, that there is real value to those batteries, not just to the customer. The customer is going to go solar plus storage. Increasingly, the customer is solar, storage, heat pump, solar storage, they have an EV. What's the value proposition for that customer to be able to save money, feel empowered, but more importantly, and my boss, Mary Powell, increasingly talks about this. She used to run a utility on the East Coast before coming to Sunrun. How can the aggregation of all these systems, you heard the word aggregate, lead to lower rates for everyone? How can we leverage this type of private investment, the decision of having a battery in someone's home, lead to a better, more efficient utility system for everyone else? So that's really, I think, the most important part of this conversation. The rules are different in different states for sure. Sunrun, today, we will announce that in 2025, we have about 80,000 homes, 75 to 80,000 homes participating in VPPs, right? Across about 9 states. I think there are about 4,000 in your state, in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, you're the second largest in Puerto Rico.
Right, and I'll say this right now, we have spent a lot of time, pain, blood, sweat, tears, participating in various program developments across the country, in many more. And it's a difficult nut to crack because you're asking all these questions. The customer has the battery. Does the customer want to control those electrons in that battery all the time? Is the customer opting into a program where they were saying, on these 5 really hot days in the summer, I agree to let go of my battery to go down to 80% or 50%? Those are all things that you slowly work through and figure out as part of your program design. And we've been doing it for a while, and we've learned a lot along the way. But I think that's the name of the game here. If we can do that, and if we do have batteries in certain geographic areas, there's a massive grid resource. That's fantastic, and I know you have looked at this a lot, Commissioner, in the state of Hawaii, and that's really what it has to be about. It's us being patient, understanding that these programs do take time to develop, understanding that there's leadership out there, recognizing that these assets are there, and the understanding that customers too, it's going to take time for them to understand how they want to participate in. So from our perspective, whether it's been in Puerto Rico, recently in Texas, which is a totally different market, right? California, we recently announced that with PG&E, we're going to have about 75,000 customers participating in their program this year. We've done work with CCAs. So we're continuing to learn, but the thesis always has to be the solar of the early days that we were discussing, the solar system, those days are really over. It's really what can the solar and the battery do to help the grid as a whole, when we are able to increasingly inject so many more electrons back into the grid at 6 p.m. at peak time, when it really makes a difference.
Great, thanks, Walker. I want to thank the panelists for the start. I wanted to add just a few of my own comments and also reflections from the trip that I was just fortunate to help lead. And this was a trip to Great Britain to view. They've been viewed and touted as some of the most advanced distribution flexibility markets in the world, and what we saw there with their utilities has a lot that we can learn from here in the United States. This was part of what's known as the Charged Initiative. If you look up online, look at chargedinitiative.org. It's a grouping of Grid Lab, which is a nonprofit based in California, Advanced Energy United, and Rocky Mountain Institute. And the idea of this initiative, which really was brought up in the challenge this morning in the first panel about all the challenges around electrification of the electric grid, or electrification of basically transportation and homes and buildings, the amount of load growth that's going to cause. And this group is looking at basically replicable models for the United States that can address that challenge at the lowest cost possible. And so we brought 7 commissioners from 5 states on a tour of different parts of the electric system in the UK. Fortunate Commissioner Yost was part of the tour, and I think hopefully have a chance to talk a little bit more about it tomorrow. So I want to add some reflections both on some of the things that we heard earlier today that I think that tour can speak to, and very much about the discussion here. So our first panel this morning, I think it was termed as, it was really a reflection on where the state is on its clean energy goals and the headwinds that we're facing. And one of the remarkable things that we saw on this tour was the Labour government came into the UK a few years ago. They've set a clean energy, what they call their Clean Power Plan 2030. They have committed to, or trying to get to, a goal of 95% renewable and clean energy by 2030. So their goal is to basically shrink the gas that they're using to the smallest extent possible. Their pain point is very similar to ours. Theirs is with gas instead of oil, highly dependent on natural gas for most of their generation today. And when the Ukraine war hit, they saw the price spikes that we felt, and felt it as a country. And that galvanized their political leadership there to set this national goal of 95% clean energy by 2030. And so what our takeaway as a group was, in their case, in dealing with that pain and headwinds, they've leaned into clean energy as the solution. And everyone we met with has concerns about the details of the plan, but they're not backing away from the overall thrust. So I thought it was another island system, larger system, but they have committed to those goals. In the course of that, they have set demand flexibility targets to complement all the clean energy and dispatchable generators that they see. So they have very similar grid challenges, and seeing a similar mix that we've been looking at here in Hawaii of a large range of variable dispatchable energy, wind, onshore, offshore, solar, backed with batteries, and then a fleet of traditional generators dispatched to back that up. They're looking at the demand flexibility of complementing both of those sources of energy to deal with intermittency and to have a lower cost form of capacity when it's needed. The regulator there has set demand flexibility first before making investments in their distribution system, so they've set that as a clear national priority. We met with two utilities, National Grid, who also has subsidiaries in the Northeast, and the UK Power Networks. UK Power Networks is one of the most advanced utilities that I've seen in the world with their planning, interconnection, and dispatch of resources. A lot of our earlier discussions, and really when I look at the red on the map that was shown this morning, like the first Achilles heel in killing all these projects has been the interconnection process. The opacity of it, the length, the uncertainty, and the delays. What we saw with UK Power Networks, they have created an online open source tool. You can see the hosting capacity updated in real time throughout their entire system. 8 million customers, 20 plus gigawatt system serves part of London. They make all of their infrastructure information available for people to download and run their own interconnection studies. So basically, they've created a level playing field with all the information available for people to figure out exactly where they can interconnect projects. They do that ahead of time, then meet with the utility with a handful of down-selected projects. So they've basically they've cut out what they estimated 5 years off the average time of interconnection for large projects, and have a 30-plus day, average 30-day interconnection time for smaller projects. All of that is backed up by a very advanced performance-based regulatory structure. They're going into their third round of their plans. A significant amount of the revenue share for these utilities comes from interconnecting quickly, doing what they're called flexible interconnections, and actually saving money through the dispatch of lower cost renewables and saving relative to the cost of other fuels. So their utilities are doing it because they're in the business of interconnection, so they can earn more revenue according to these metrics. So the business model there is what we have looked at, but they're on their second and third generations of those plans. The last thing is on their actual use of demand flexibility. They have highly automated markets that operate in multiple time frames. It's all cost effective. They run an auction mechanism in multiple time frames. So they're getting the lowest cost resources, and that's how they're able to assure that they save money and lower cost totally. So that was a brief run through, and we're still working on the write-up of that report. And so, again, what I bring back is the ambition is important. There's other places in the world working on this. We need to keep leaning into the headwinds, not slow down and stop. But we have other places we can look to. I think particularly every commissioner in the room that saw like flipping the interconnection process around and making that easy and transparent. There's nowhere that we are aware of in the US that operates that way. So let's see, I think that's the last of what I wanted to share. I wanted to pass some questions back to our panel here. So I think first, if you guys, well, actually let's take some from the audience here. We'll mix it up a little bit. So Brad Albert, hopefully you're okay with me identifying you with your question, but Brad's question, I think each of you can talk about this from the VPP programs and your experience. How are the customer aggregators compensated for their commitments to the program? There's various models here. The battery bonus was an upfront incentive payment. You can have payment, like pay for performance as you go. In Puerto Rico, I know it's by a dispatch event. So can you just explain, like in your experience, some of the best examples of what you've seen, how the compensation to customers work?
The way it works in Puerto Rico is that we pay the aggregator $1.25 per kilowatt hour, and they pay their client. We secure 50 events a year for the aggregator that we're going to give them, but actually we're always going beyond. This summer we forecast 90 called events, and usually it was 2-hour events, but now we believe it's going to be closer to 4-hour events. And then the aggregator pays their clients per their contract, and they pay them quarterly. But it all goes through the aggregator to Luma. They submit the invoice to Luma. They give them the evidence of the kilowatt hours that they actually were called upon and given to the system. If we increase this to 40 megawatts or beyond, we need to install what we call the DERMS, Distributed Energy Resource Measurement Management Systems. Because right now, the way it works is that Luma calls or sends an email to each aggregator, and then each aggregator contacts the client by email. So with the DERMS, it could be actually dispatched as one unit, one system, and the financing of the invoices is much easier as well. So that's part of what the Energy Bureau is analyzing to approve the cost of the DERMS. And it's been successful because the client actually doesn't have to deal with Luma. They deal with their aggregators that they already had a relationship with because of their system. And there was a study conducted after this trial period, and the clients, their number one, 26% said that the reason was the incentive cost. And then the other 26% said that the reason they got into the program was to help Puerto Rico, help to avoid load sheds. So I think that talks very well about the people of Puerto Rico. And the other percent just said it was easy dealing with the aggregator. They felt really comfortable dealing with the aggregator, not the utility. And the other percentage was just saying that it was such an easy process to get into and get out of that. That's why they liked the program.
Yeah, I would say we have experimented with different structures, right? So the first one, and you heard Brian use the term simplicity. It's like, okay, if you in the home want to participate in a VPP that is a partnership between Sunrun and the LSE, Sunrun and the local utility, the simple way to do it is you get a check, and then we have to determine, should it be $250, $500, $750 to check, yes, I want to participate in this program. Meaning that for the 10 hottest days in the summer, you are agreeing that your battery can deplete between 20 and 30% of its electrons during those times. So that's like, I think, an example of simplicity. We've also worked with in an ISO market where it's more of sort of shared revenue, right? So there's different models out there, and I will say that it's something that we are still looking at in terms of what makes the most sense locally. I was having this conversation at lunch today where I said that, I thought that it would be a good idea for my wife to be a guinea pig in our situation in Oakland where I live, where we have a Sunrun PPA with a Tesla battery, and we got a letter saying, hey, do you want to participate in this VPP program? And I just decided to stay in the background and see what she said, and she ended up declining because she was thinking, I pay a little bit more for my PPA because I value, as a consumer, backup power. And here where we live, there's been, for the last 3 or 4 years, there have been a few, maybe 2 to 3 PSPS events a year where our entire neighborhood goes black for a while. And, she's just like, no, like that's what we're paying for. That's why we wanted to make sure that we were paying for the battery for that backup capability. And so those all allow for great learning experiences for us as we continue to look for the next VPP program and how we're going to offer it to our customers.
Yeah, I would say we heard a lot today about how community-minded Hawaii is. And in this context, I think we have a consumer base that is uniquely motivated because of how in touch they are with their energy costs to help one another. However, they're not going to do it at a cost, right? At a worse ROI. So to go back to the silly car analogy, Jay, you borrow my car, better fill it up with gas when you bring it back, right? That's removing the disincentive to participate, right? I'm not going to let Jay borrow my car again if he continually doesn't fill it up with gas. But then what's on top of that? That just gets me back to break even, right? What's most important in my experience to a consumer, right, is the upfront performance payment, right? It's very easy to understand, right? And we think about how this is actually done at the kitchen table with consumers, right? That is where, right, it is explained, and it has to be simple, and that is a simple concept for a consumer to grasp. Monthly performance payments, that's also simple to grasp. Beyond that, it gets too complicated. Right, and one of the things that I think, the unique success story of DERs in Hawaii is that they were deployed by a very diverse group of contractors and EPCs, right? And those are specialists in solar system construction. They're not policy wonks, they're not economists, right? And they are responsible for going out into the market and making these programs successful. So it is an absolute requirement that we double down on simplicity and fair compensation that is looking forward to where we want to go and considering the other related market implications that are barriers to deployment.
Just one follow-up. I have appreciated that we're not using the word incentive very much during this conversation because I think that provides confusion to the discussion. So you just heard compensation. And I think that whether it's New York, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, California, we need to look at these VPPs as the potential of grid services. In other words, yes, the customer has the incentive to say, yes, I will release my electrons at 5 p.m. on a hot Thursday. But that's not an incentive program which then quickly becomes enthralled in the terminology around subsidies. This is the aggregation of all those systems are doing good for the grid. That's really where we want to get. And that's the story that we have to be able to tell, right? In the sense that you are leveraging non-ratepayer funds at a time where we're seeing across the country massive amounts of money that are going to be necessary to build our grid infrastructure. So how can we leverage all of these electrons that are out there that are not taking up that type of infrastructure build out to help all ratepayers? And I think a lot of where we're getting stuck right now is in this word, it's an incentive program, it's a subsidy program, we all need to pay for it, when what we're really trying to do is figure out the way to leverage all of these systems that are out there, which you started looking at years ago.
Yeah, if I could mention, we pay $125, and there are some people that say that's a lot of money because the peakers, If I turn on my peakers, it's going to be 38 cents a kilowatt hour. But with each load shed, we're losing double or triple that amount of money. For each day that we have no electricity on the island, it's like $231 million that we lose in the economy. So actually the 125 is it's very justifiable, but we are aware that we don't want to bring the VPPs to go, to be the source of the electricity in the island, because it will be too expensive. So that's why we're only doing the program for 3 years. And when this period from June to October that we're in an emergency completes in October 31, those auto-enrolled people that we got into the program, we're going to reduce the amount of megawatts that we're going to take from them. But we're going to keep them in the program so they have an incentive. So if we need them, then we could have those megawatts. But that's why we need to control the program. The way we do it is that the Energy Bureau approves a certain budget. And so they're limited to the amount, either the amount of clients that are going to be in the program or the amount of events. They have, let's say, 21.8 million is the permanent program right now. And it gets paid by the PPCA rider, which is the Power Purchase Clause adjustment. And that's how we recuperate that 21.8 million. But that does limit the amount of megawatts and the amount of clients in the program.
I'm going to combine, there's some common themes in the questions here. And so I'm going to put this out to the panel too. There's two topics. I mean, I think most of the examples and programs we've talked about here have basically been solar plus storage. And so the group's thoughts on how to expand program, what other end uses, thoughts on that, examples that you've seen, and then also to a broader swath of customers, particularly low-income customers.
We have what we call the load reduction program. This is for the industries because the CBS only applies to residential and small commercial. For the big industries that we have in Puerto Rico, which are the pharmaceuticals, we're talking with them to do the load reduction program, and they want to participate in it. And basically what we do is that when we need to reduce the load, we tell them to turn their emergency generators at their facilities and take their load to be done by using their generators. The problem is those generators have Title V permits or EPA permits or Department of Natural Resources permits, but the EPA could actually give the non-attainment release action notice. If it's an emergency, the EPA declares an emergency, these industries could turn on those generation permits, and those hours of operation does not count into their permit maximum of operations that they have for that year. So we're trying to do that with the new federal government, and we're talking with EPA. And if we could do this now, we could add 50 more megawatts for this summer of 2025.
Yeah, just following up on that, Jay, I do think that it's really good to point out that while we're talking about solar plus storage, at the end of the day, it's really what is the smart energy consumer of tomorrow. So, about 4.5 years ago, we announced a partnership with Ford Motor Company with the Ford F-150, right? And we've had pilots across the country sort of looking at how that vehicle with its massive batteries can also participate in these markets going forward. We talk a lot with demand response program administrators and demand response companies. And what we found is that yes, we need to really be looking at what that future is, of course, including heat pumps, for example, induction stoves. But rooftop solar really is the ultimate gateway drug for the smarter energy consumer, right? So like I said at the beginning, most customers, when you're having that kitchen table conversation, they're not really focused on what goes into their electricity bill and how they can take that control. But that initial rooftop solar drug gets them thinking about all these other ways that they can participate, especially now as we're improving on the technology side. So we believe that eventually you're going to be connecting all of those in a better fashion, and there's going to be technology that allows consumers to see on their phone, like, okay, what's happening in real time. But again, if it's not simple, it's not going to work. It has to be simple to the point where they recognize how their energy behavior can first lead to lower bills, but also eventually be a revenue generator. That's where we're going to go, hopefully.
So if we pay someone to discharge their battery at their home from 6 to 8 p.m., right, and therefore, from the grid's perspective, right, say their load on site functionally disappears, that's the same thing as energy efficiency. So I'm going to give a shout out to Hawaii Energy and Caroline Carl, who I hope is in the audience, right, and another unique, right, program administered by Hawaii Energy is the solar water heating rebate program, right, and Hawaii is by far the most successful solar water heating market in the United States, another homegrown success story, right, attached to our DER industry. But compensating energy efficiency choices, smart load shifting choices is the same thing.
Yeah, I can just maybe add a couple things. One, in preparing for this panel, I was looking at I think they're monthly or quarterly program, the customer enrollment or customer energy resource enrollment programs. Historically, here the largest number of customers involved in a VPP is the old direct load control programs. I believe it's 25,000 folks throughout, well, I think it's 25,000 on Oahu, and it was several thousand here on this island with just a simple device controlling water heaters during peak periods, and I believe there's a frequency relay in a number of them. So that's kind of old school, but the idea is that simple structures, those are appliances in everyone's home. A shout out to local startup company, Shifted Energy, is specialized in both doing controllable water heaters, but with a focus on LMI customers. And I believe some of your programs are dealing with multifamily homes or community programs in California.
Yeah, about 75,000 customers in California participate in what's called the SOMA program, which is a multifamily housing development for low-income consumers.
Okay, well, we've got a long question here, so I'm going to decipher that in a minute. People, please keep sending your questions in. I think I want one of my questions back to the panel. What do you see as, you've explained what programs are available today. What do you see as necessary to expand, accelerate what's being done in Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and broader? Tony, maybe can you start on the program you've expanded, but also the potential that I believe LUMA has looked into and evaluated?
Yeah, actually, the aggregators I believe are the ones that are running the show of this program. LUMA and the Energy Bureau are trying to stay away from the program in terms of talking directly to the people, to the clients. And what the aggregators are saying that they haven't been so aggressive to promote this program because one, in the transition pilot program, everyone thought it was going to end in the first 3 years or the first 2 years. So the aggregator didn't want to put money into their company to be promoting these programs. So they want to see more permanent programs, a longer period, and the clients want that also. So that's one thing that they're looking at that could be positive for this. And I did mention that the clients could opt out or change their reserve anytime they want. And I think that easiness or that assurance that they control their battery and they control how much they want to earn or how much they want to help the country avoid load sheds has helped a lot. We've only had 2% opt out from the almost 10,000 people in the program, only 2%, and that's really great. So I think this could be really successful and move much higher. And Luma uses this program as the first resource to control its system, the grid or reduce load sheds. This is the first type of program that they call upon.
And I'm curious, do we have data on why the 2% opt out?
No, why they drop out, but
Small enough
you know,
number.
the aggregators told me that's a very low amount.
It is, yeah, nationally.
Yeah. So we really don't need to. I was looking at the bring your own device, and if I'm not mistaken, you have a commitment of 3 years. What I read that the client had to do a 3-year commitment, and so we have no commitment. And the truth is, it's been 3 years. We're going to 4 years now, and they've been totally committed without having that obligation to give their battery. Because in Puerto Rico, the reason we installed solar and battery, it's not because it's going to give us cheaper electricity. It's because we want to have power for the hurricanes. We don't trust the grid system or the generation assets that we have in Puerto Rico. So most clients are people who have money, they could afford it, and they want to have all their capacity that they can keep just in case. But this has changed. There's even a commissioner that she got her system, and she was saying you have to be crazy to share your battery with an aggregator. And now she's actually doing it. Yeah. It took her 3 years, but she's doing it.
I would say, and we discussed this a lot internally, like if you're in a market where the customer value proposition is there without a VPP program, or the VPP program is complicated, it's not going to happen. Because from what we've seen, the salespeople, the aggregators, they want to have the simplicity of the sale and move forward. If there's a situation where it's saying, hey, you can go solar and storage, but you need to wait 3 months, then things begin to fall apart, right? So but if we closed our eyes and said, wait a minute, what if the retail price of electricity, here was 15 cents, right? Then all of a sudden you'd be in a situation where the value proposition for solar plus storage isn't really there compared to what it is today. And then we would probably be digging deeper, trying to find value for those aggregated systems, right, that they can provide to the grid. So it goes up and down. But that's what we found so far, is that you need to have a reason why, an explanation why the aggregation of all these systems is really something that's worth it for the overall system.
Really teeing it up for me, because in this market, that's where we are.
Yep.
Right? The ROI is there, right? As a consumer, you do not have to participate, right? Even in a tax credit-less environment, because of our high cost of energy, the ROI is still there. And one of the things I wanted to comment on earlier, I think Ted Peck made the comment, like your grandfather's solar system, and you made a reference to, not doing the solar systems of old. I slightly disagree, because one of the things that is occurring amidst, those beautiful community-led processes like Leilani described earlier, for those larger resources, I can tell you from firsthand experience, based on how we operate as a company, individuals on Molokai, right, are going off grid while we wait for these things to play out, right? And they have been, right? This is what, our company has supplied this suite of materials since 1975. Like, that's where the market started. That still is a significant portion of our business today, and it will remain so. And right, so really what we're talking about is, making the transition, because we still are doing our grandfather's solar systems. And so bring your own device plus now. Bring your own device plus is a big improvement over the original BYOD program. And it does what I mentioned earlier, it's paying the consumer for their gas, right? During that export window, you're getting fair value or equivalent value for your energy. and you get an upfront payment. I think in terms of aligning interests, however, going back to that greatest asset base that we have in Hawaii, that legacy NEM customer base, there's still a lot of NEM systems without batteries. So if we really want to get BYOD Plus going, the first thing that it has to do is, just like we saw in Battery Bonus, we got to unlock that piece of the market, right? And we all want to add storage to that, right? And so if you want to get a NEM customer, right, that probably is storage curious already for pure resiliency purposes, right, you got to allow them to add generation as well. That is a must for that section of the market, and that will move the market very quickly. We've already seen that in Battery Bonus.
Okay, we had one question here. It's a little bit of it's on topic, but different. What's about vehicle to grid? Anyone feel prepared to take? I'm looking at Walker because you guys experience with the Ford Lightning. So the question is, do you foresee any policy breakthroughs that will finally allow vehicle to grid to break out of pilot program status?
I'm definitely not the expert, but I do think that we're still in the laboratory phase for sure, which is a good thing, just like we have been, across various phases of our industry over time. I know that utilities are increasingly running pilot programs, increasingly talking about it. Every year, there are more pieces of legislation in state capitals about V2G programs. That's a great thing. So let's be patient.
Yeah, maybe the only thing I'll say, this is part of our experience in the UK. Most of they're not selling, they're selling solar plus storage, but all their flexibility is coming from EV chargers and heat pumps. Right. So the energy retailers there are coming up with all sorts of different ways to package and sell those. And then when they do so, they're almost always built in with some sort of charge management flexibility. So it's not full vehicle to grid, but as all the chargers are going in, they're being prepped to be called on for flexibility from the beginning and kind of ready-made for the customer. So I think that was the example that we saw.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that when I said the 90 events, the events are just not to get capacity to reduce the load shed on the grid. The events are also, now we're studying how to regionalize these VPPs to just turn on the batteries in a certain area and not have to, because right now the way it works, we turn on all the batteries. But we're studying, we do issue events to see how we could isolate those systems to just, if this area is the one affected, we could isolate those batteries and just use that. So we're calling events to do a lot of research as well.
So like localized dispatch, that's what you're saying?
Localized dispatch, yeah. And use it to solve regional problems, situations, yeah.
So we're in closing here. I'm going to give everyone a few closing remarks, and we'll start with Brian.
I wanted to do a quick point just to highlight kind of the pace of technology change. So there are specific hardwares in the industry, inverters, storage systems, battery management units, often have generator integration ports, and probably not endorsed by manufacturers, but there's some pretty creative solutions for tying vehicle loads to generator ports for additional resiliency on site. So I think it just illustrates, probably contradicts my earlier point that we're still deploying our grandfather systems. Like, the hardware capability is there, and really what we're doing through these programs is unlocking it.
Anything you want to say? Anything in closing?
I love the term that Walker shared earlier regarding Hawaii sending a postcard from the future. Really, the story of the success of the DER industry in Hawaii is driven by how diversified and resilient it is, and because of the diversified network, largely of contractors that deploys it. And programmatic success, to me, enables that diverse network of contractors to continue to participate and enhance programmatic resiliency because of that.
Tony, you get the last word. Commissioner Torres, sorry.
Yeah, I've been working on this for the last 2 days. On behalf of the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau and myself, Maholo Neo Lua. Maholo Neo Lua.
How about, yes, a round of applause for our panelists here. Thank you for having us, and our day is over. I think we can go work on more solutions outside.